Morning. Glad to see everybody here this morning. We're studying in James, the third chapter, and in the last chapter, James was talking about the subject of faith and works. So we kind of dispatched that and got that out of the way in the last chapter, and he's changing his discourse here in chapter 3 to a pretty important subject that we'll discuss hopefully at length. There's a lot of stuff to be said about the third chapter, just like there was in the second chapter. I know that kind of one thing that I've gotten out of studying this that I really didn't think about. James was a very learned man, and it's not quite as evident reading it in English and the different translations that we've got. But when you look at the way it was written in the Greek and the care that he took to choose the proper words to get the meaning that he wanted, I think it was pretty impressive on his education and the thoughtfulness that obviously he was inspired, but the thoughtfulness that he put into the words that he chose. So before we go any further, I'd like for Kevin Cleveland, if you would, to lead our minds in prayer. Okay, so let's look at verse 1. My brothers, do not be many teachers, knowing that we shall receive the greater condemnation. So the verb here that's used in the original text is what's called the present middle imperative with the negative. And it basically says, stop becoming so many of you wanting to be preachers or teachers. That's kind of the thought that he's doing here. And don't put yourself in a situation where you're wanting to be a teacher and you're not ready for it. And it appears that there was a lot of people in that time. And you remember we're talking about the Jews that were afar, not necessarily the ones who were there in Jerusalem. That there's a lot of them that wanted to be teachers. The problem was there was a lot more things they needed to learn before they became teachers. And he is encouraging them not to rush into the office of being a teacher without proper preparation, and also a due regard to the importance of being a teacher and the things that that go along with it. And it would appear that there was a kind of a disposition among a lot of these early converts that they desired to be teachers, maybe as much for the attention and the influence that goes along with being a teacher. But the problem was they didn't have sufficient preparation, and they were doing things that they really weren't qualified to do. Right. And if we think about in Acts, Apollos, there's a good example of somebody who he was the scriptures tell us he was an eloquent man and he was mighty in the scriptures, and but he wasn't teaching the right things. He was eloquent in the old scriptures, but he didn't have the preparation and the knowledge to be teaching what he was teaching. He was basically teaching the wrong thing, and that can happen. That can happen quite often when you have somebody who's a teacher that is not qualified to be in the job.
We've studied on this very similar to what you did. Apparently, first century church, there was just a lot of people that desired this because he was I don't know if you want to call it status symbol, but it seemed like you taught, you were souls and balance.
Yeah, I mean, I've run into this over the years in the fire service, and I'll have a pretty good student in a class, and the next thing you know, they're ready to be an instructor. Well, the problem is they haven't been in the fire service long enough to know the stuff that an instructor needs to know. One of the things that right, yeah, I can tell you some stories about that too. But that when you get to be a teacher, one of the things that and I stress this on a lot of the classes that I teach is it's important that you know what you're doing, but it's also just as important why you're doing it. And it's kind of the same way here. You can get out there and read all this stuff, but the why is just important as the being able to do it. And that's where the experience comes in. And even at that, I mean, there's different ways of having experience. You can have 10 years of experience where you grow through and learn things, or you can have 1 year experience 10 times. So I mean, there's a lot of things that go into the situation. And that's why in most fields there are certain qualifications that you have to have, not only academically but experience wise, before that they put you into a situation. And that's just as important in teaching the gospel and teaching classes in the church. You need to have that experience, and you need to have that grounding, so that not only what you're teaching, but why you're teaching it, because you exercise as a teacher a lot of influence on your students. And it's it can be a good thing. You can have a good influence, but if you're teaching the wrong thing, it can be a bad influence, and you could lead those people right to destruction by teaching the wrong thing. So it's really important that as teachers, we're conscientious and making sure that we're putting in the work and putting in the study to make sure that we're teaching the proper things.
Teaching was important enough that it was one of the spiritual gifts.
Right.
Mentioned in 1 Corinthians.
Right.
And not all teachers had these gifts, I'm sure.
Right.
It was that important.
Right. And it's not to say that everybody in the church will not are not to be teachers, because I mean even people who don't get up and publicly teach should be able to tell somebody the plan of salvation. Something that's a teaching deal. That's a teaching moment. And it's not to say that you should never teach anything. That's not what James is saying. He's talking about somebody who is getting up and publicly speaking and being an expounder of the word to a group of people. So he's not discouraging people from teaching, but to teach in some type of official capacity. And it's the obligation of all of us to utilize our talents. And there's a lot of different areas in the church where you can have good works, and it's based on your ability. There's lots of things to do, even to the point of sitting in the pews and being a good listener. That's just as important as the preacher getting up there and preaching, because if the pews are empty, kind of hard to spread the word to a bunch of empty pews in a situation like that. So you should enter the office of teaching, and remember that if you perform it negligently, or you don't live up to the doctrine that you're teaching, it's going to have a negative influence on the other people. And the teachers are going to be held to a higher standard, because of the office that you have. You're going to have a higher standard. And if you lead a bunch of people to destruction, then you're going to get the same treatment. Other comments about that verse? Oh. That's right. Absolutely. I think it's called leadership by example. Yeah. All right, let's look at verse 2. For in many things we all offend. If anyone does not offend in word, the same is a full-grown man, able also to bridle the whole body. And I want to read the American Standard translation of that too, because I think it in my mind it kind of clears it up a little bit. It says, "For in many things we all stumble. If any stumble not in word, the same is a perfect man, able to bridle the whole body." So in many things here, the in the original text, it was referring to many things, and for whosoever shall keep the whole law and yet offend in one point, he is guilty of all. When we talk about perfection here, we are not talking about being absolutely perfect without sin and without any mistakes at all. We are all going to we're all going to stumble. We're all going to trip and fall. And the reference here is made to everybody. Everybody is going to trip and fall. But we should strive not to trip and fall. We should strive to be perfect. We're not going to achieve perfection, but we're going to try to do it. And it's observed that the writer affirms two things here, which includes himself. He's putting himself in the same situation as everybody else. He's not perfect. He is going to stumble also. So we are all going to stumble, and we're all going to stumble in many things. We're going to make a lot of mistakes in our lives, and that's anybody that says that they don't make mistakes, they're lying to you, because everybody does that. And the fact that James includes himself among those who trip and fall in a manner is no reflection on the inspiration that he received, but simply that he's a man there, and he's human, and he's going to make mistakes. So we have to distinguish between the inspiration of the penman of James versus the personal and individual characteristics and activities that James has as a Christian. So here James basically returns to his theme here, and we're going to start talking about the proper use of the tongue, which is in particular what he's going to deal with in this chapter. And the thing that causes us to trip or to stumble is probably going to be something coming out of our mouth. And when we talk about the tongue here, we're talking about our speech and things along that line in our speech and in our actions. So when we talk about the word here, we're actually talking about the things that we say. And the one who stumbles not in the word is a perfect man, one who has reached full maturity in spiritual growth. And again, it doesn't denote sinlessness. It just denotes full development or a mature, grown-up person. So the meaning is, if any man does not keep on stumbling in the word, he has reached that status in life where he is fully mature. So the more you can control the stumbling, the better you're going to be trying to reach that goal of full maturity. And the word that's translated in our text perfect in the original text more talked about a goal of being a goal of being fully mature and having good spiritual growth. And one who has attained such a complete mastery over his tongue has truly reached the goal in spiritual achievement. When you got your mouth under control, you've done quite a bit. And this doesn't mean that James that he is above the possibility of sinning, and it means that he has acquired such a mastery over his tongue that he's able to control it. And that's a good thing to try to attain. And he who is able to restrain himself in word or his speech would evidence such remarkable self-control that he might properly be assumed that he is able to bridle not only his tongue, but to keep his entire body under control and live the type of life that God would have us to live. And to exercise restraint over it is to demonstrate the ability to keep control of all members of the body, which is a good requirement. Comments about that verse? All right, let's move on to verse 3. Behold, we put bits in the horse's mouth so that they may obey us, and we turn about their whole body. So this illustrates that which James has affirmed, to control the tongue is in effect to exercise restraint over the whole body. And of course, a horse is a pretty large animal, but if you look at the size of the animal compared to the bridle is actually pretty small, and that bridle is able to control that large horse in most cases. So by having control of the tongue and the head, you're going to have pretty much control over the whole body. Comments about that verse? Pretty self-explanatory. Let's move to verse 4. Behold also the ships being so great and driven by fierce winds, yet they are turned about with a very small rudder, where the impulse of him steering desires. So here in James first uses the illustration of the bridle of the horse, and now he's talking about the rudder on a ship. And compared to the size of the ship, the rudder is a pretty small thing, and it's under the control of in the Bible here calls it the steerman, but I think on a ship in the quartermaster, who steers the ship? The helmsman, pilot on a Navy ship is the quartermaster, the helmsman. Okay, but anyway, they have control over the ship, and with both of these figures, the writer tells the reader that they should, he's using something that they should be familiar with so that they can grasp the lesson, that they've got here. I think about, I was studying here about the rudder, I was thinking of the Bismarck in World War II. Here's this great big ship, got a little tiny rudder, and just, by luck, they hit the rudder of that ship, and it was just kind of going in circles because they lost control. That great big ship, a little tiny rudder, caused it to lose control, and then the rest of the story, it was it was a lucky shot. Right. Yeah, that was definitely But just that one little thing caused that ship, the destruction of that ship. So here, notwithstanding the will of the first of the horse, it wants to do what it wants to do, but the bridle controls it. And the ship upon a sea, you've got the wind and all the things operating on it, but yet it's easily controlled by that small object. So the illustration here, we're able to control large animals and huge ships with very small objects. We should be able to control our tongue because it is not the largest part of the body. It's just the one that causes the most trouble. So if we're able to exercise similar rule over our tongues, then we're pretty much going to be able to govern the whole body. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 5. Even so, the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. Behold, how little a fire kindles, how large a forest. So this is the application of the illustrations of the bridle and the rudder, and he's applying it to the tongue. And though it's small, it's exceedingly effective in demonstrating the fact that a thing may be little yet powerful and influential. And the tongue is a small object compared to the whole body, just as the bridle is a small in comparison to the horse, and the rudder is small in comparison to the ship. But the bridle and the rudder are capable of exercising great influence, and that influence, the same type of influence that the tongue has, and a lot of potential to cause a lot of massive problems. So the contrast is drawn here is between the tiny character of the tongue and the hugeness of the body and the effect which the tongue exercises, despite the great disparity in size. And it talks here about boasting things. And in the original text, this is in the present active indicative, whatever that means. But it basically, if we're putting this in layman's terms, this is a continual boasting. This goes on all the time, and it's a characteristic of the little member that has a tendency to talk big, to be arrogant, and to be boastful in action. And I think that's a pretty good description of what the tongue has the capability of doing. So where there is a very proper sense in which the highest possible honor is due the tongue, because it does have the capability of putting out really good sentiments and talking and saying really nice things, really thoughtful things, impart wisdom. It's got just as much capability to tear things down and cause a lot of problems as it does building up. So, the tongue can work both ways. It can be a positive thing or it can be a negative thing. And it has a lot of power and influence, depending on how it is used. So what we need to do is we need to use the capability of the tongue to do the greatest good and stay away from doing the greatest amount of harm. So, and I like this part here about the fire part of it. Okay, a little tiny spark can cause a huge forest fire. And if you want a great illustration of that, a couple years ago, those big fires out in California, it was caused by a small spark. It was an electric line that fell and hit the ground and caused a spark, and the conditions were right. Same deal over in Maui last year. Had all that big fire over there. It was caused by an electric line. And there has been fires where cigarettes thrown on the ground, just that little bit of ember in the cigarettes have caused great forest fires and stuff. Yeah, one of the things you probably don't know is that if the humidity is below 23%, that's kind of the cutoff there where you're going to have the big fires and stuff. And if you'll watch when the governor, in his infinite wisdom, every now and then he does get it right. You watch the humidity and stuff. When he has a red flag day for forest fires, the humidity is under 23%, and that's because you could cause a fire. And I'll tell you something else just for your own edification. Catalytic converters on cars burn 2,000 degrees. You park your car out in a field somewhere when the temperature or the humidity is less than 23%, liable to set the field on fire and burn your car up. That's happened before too. Well, I wasn't smoking though, but your catalytic converter was. So get a situation. Anyway, I'll get off the fireman stuff here. Huh? Yeah. Oh Lord, don't get me started on electric cars. So this relatively small spark can kindle this small fire, and it's another good illustration about the power of the tongue. One small word in the wrong place can cause a whole lot of problems, and you see the wisdom that James is giving here, and it all goes back to a little bit of control. Keep those things from happening, and you're not going to have the problem. I thought it was funny. Got to get back on the fire stuff here a minute. In a couple of the commentaries, it talked about the Great Chicago Fire, and the legend says that it was started in it did start in Miss O'Leary's barn, no question about it. What exactly happened, they really don't know. They think that the cow maybe kicked over the lantern or something like that. But one thing that most people don't know is even though the town of Chicago was pretty much completely destroyed, Mrs. O'Leary's house survived. The fire went in all directions and her house didn't burn down. And as a matter of fact, when I do my class on the Great Chicago Fire, I have a picture of their house that was taken several days after the fire, and guess what was standing in the front yard? The cow. Okay, back on the subject here. All right, any other comments about verse 5? Right. Directing.
Wherever he leads.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mega churches. Yeah. And the sad thing about it is the people think they're infallible. I mean, and they just you're blind like a bunch of little sheep. They follow them over the cliff. That's where they're all going to. That's where they're all going to end up.
I think that this teaching is so good for us as Christians because it really applies to our everyday life, especially for those who know that we are Christians. That we try to live a certain kind of life. And if we use our tongue not to encourage or to uplift, but to take down and to discourage, it hurts our Christian example and it certainly tears us down as the relationships we have with other people.
Mm-hmm.
It's so important to be an uplifter, to be an encourager.
Right. Any other comments? All right, let's look at verse 6. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. So the tongue is set among our members, spotting all the body and inflaming the course of nature and being inflamed by hell. So having shown the devastating effect of fire when it's raging out of control, James here is telling us that this is what the tongue is and in the improper consequences of its use. If we use it wrong, we're going to have problems. And he's pretty vividly pointed out how serious that this could be. And the figure is not an unusual one here in the scriptures. In Proverbs 16 and 27, it says, "A worthless man devises mischief, and in his lips there is a scorching fire." So this statement, "and the tongue is a fire," identifies the tongue in its effect, which the fire, which begins as a tiny flame but immediately becomes a great conflagration, is indication of the talking about in the preceding verse. He's expounding here on that fire that he talked about in the other verse. And in case you don't know what a conflagration is, it's a firestorm. Okay, and it's a fire that starts to generate its own wind, and they're pretty much uncontrollable. And what happens is you get the embers and stuff going up in the air, and it causes a current, and it's heated gases go up. These embers are in the heated gases, and then as the gases cool, these embers fall down. And basically, that's what the Great Chicago Fire was a conflagration, because it was very dry and had a lot of wooden structures and stuff. And as these embers would go along, it just fell down on top of the roofs and set the thing on fire. And the bad thing about a conflagration is you can't control it. There's not enough fire departments in the world to control one of those once they get completely out of control. And James is using very good language here when he's talking about this. So it's a fire that can inflict pain. It can cause destruction, which goes along with it. And there's going to be effects that'll follow it. You get in there and you get somebody, they can destroy a congregation in one sermon if they're talking the wrong things. And it's happened before. And that's one thing that the elders have to be careful about, is making sure that what's being preached from the pulpit is correct. And if it's not correct, then it needs to be stopped, and the fire needs to be put out before it becomes a more problem. So we must, of course, remember that it's in the improper use of the tongue, which is talked about here. And all the members of the body, the tongue is, when improperly exercised, the most wicked of all. That's the thing that can cause the most problems. Your ears don't cause any problems most of the time. There's parts of the body that can cause problems, but no problems like the tongue has the possibility of causing. Now, the phrase here, "world of iniquity," is an expression and the design of which is to indicate the sum of evil, and the tongue, talking about the tongue because of the great power, and it can become an evil activity. And the world of iniquity among the members of the body, because the harm that it can cause and it produces, it utterly is impossible to measure. When you put out bad things, you really don't know how far that's going to go, because words and things travel, and there can be things there can be an underlying current that that you don't see, that can all of a sudden come up and cause problems later. And a lot of the scholars talk about things that come out of slander and the use of profanity and falsehoods that are talked about, and scandals that all these things can cause just by somebody saying the wrong thing, or profound or professing the wrong thing.
He uses imagery language here. The idea of destruction or hell in this Hebrew or Greek word he uses is indicative of the Gehenna dung,
Mm-hmm.
south of Jerusalem,
Right.
which seemed to always be on fire.
Right.
And it was pretty graphic when he's describing his idea of the fire and destruction.
You're right. And as a matter of fact, in the original text, it used the term Gehenna. It didn't use the word Hades, or it didn't use the word hell. It used the word Gehenna. And those people absolutely knew what he was talking about, because that was a fire that that burned pretty much all the time. It talks about here, it setteth on fire the wheel of nature, and there's a little bit of, this is kind of an obscure saying here, and it talks in the original text, it says it was the wheel of birth. And in the some of the ancient manuscripts, in the margin, it actually had the word birth written down there, and birth, which pretty much ushers in life. And the wheel, if you look at this, the wheel of birth, it may signify the entire existence, beginning with the birth to death. This is the possibility that you've got with your tongue. It's just one great big circle. You're constantly in a situation where at any given time you can say something that can cause a problem, just in a circle. And so you've got to be pretty much on guard all the time. And all of it is set on fire by the improper use of the tongue here. And I think James is really driving the point home. How important it is that we don't inflame people with our speech, and start false rumors and things along that line. And it's not just what you teach, but it can go well beyond that, with starting rumors, slandering people, and things along that line. And of course, my next notes here is about Gehenna, so Bill's already covered that, so we'll move on. But we got to remember that an evil tongue can defile the entire body, and a defiled body is fit only to be thrown on the refuge dump. And that's kind of goes in along with this Gehenna, because they would throw bodies onto that fire also. So, and it, like I say, it burned all the time. Comments about that verse? All right. Let's look at verses 7 and 8. I don't think we're going to get through all of this before Keith rings the bell here, but we'll start anyway. Verse 7. For every kind of animal, and of birds, and of reptiles, and of sea animals is tamed, and has been tamed by mankind. But no one can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. So the kind here that he is talking about in the original text was talking about nature. Okay? There is a lot of brutal things that go on in nature. And even on nature shows, they show some of the brutal things that can go on. And James here is using terms that these early Jews would understand, because he is using the same terminology that we see in Genesis, the first chapter, verses 27 and 28, and in Genesis 9, verses 1 and 2. And he is using the same type of language, talking about the creation and man having dominion over over the earth and over the animals and things like that. But this dominion is granted to man, had to be exercised, and it also had to be restrained. And that's not to say that man has got complete dominion over the animals. Okay, you get in a fight with a lion, you know what? You might get chewed up. And now we have the ability maybe to kill the lion with a spear or a rifle or something like that. But one on one with a lion, we don't do too good. Okay, so we don't have complete communion, and that's kind of the deal here. It needs to be exercised and it needs to be restrained. We need to use good judgment. It's not good judgment to get in a fight with a lion. Okay, just we can, but it's not necessarily good judgment. And it's the same deal with the tongue. You can say a lot of things. You pretty much say what you want to say, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing for us to do that. Right, right. So James doesn't say that every wild thing has been tamed, but he affirms that it's the fact that every kind of creature has been brought under subjection to man, and I think we can all pretty much agree with that. So the beasts here that he's talking about, we're talking about the four-legged animals, the birds, the ones that fly, the creeping things, the serpents, things along that line. This is terminology that these people would understand. It also shows the four classes of the creation of the animals. It's designated in Genesis 9 and 2. So it has been tamed by mankind, and the phraseology in the original text was by the nature of the human is how it was written in the original text. And that is that every kind of brute nature has been subject to and subdued by human nature. And it was James' design to emphasize the fact that the taming process has been exercised in a fashion from the beginning of creation. It was God's will, and God directed man and gave man the ability to do that. It was part of God's plan even before the fall in the garden. And it's a sad commentary on man that an embarrassing exhibition of his moral and spiritual degradation, that is through able to tame the wild animals, but he can't keep his own tongue under control. That's a bad situation. So Keith's got to get up and ring the bell. So we'll stop here and pick up there next week. Appreciate everybody's attention and comments today.